The New Orleans Saints defense looks ready to go for 2022. What we learned about the unit all throughout training camp, we got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we are free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jacksonola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. I appreciate you, as always, for being here with us as we look ahead to the New Orleans Saints' final preseason game against the Los Angeles Chargers, which will be tonight. That's right, it is a black and gold game day here on this Friday. So today we're going to take a look at three players to watch when it comes to that Chargers game, including two wide receivers that have a real opportunity to either make a roster or at least get a job in 2022. Then we'll also take a look at our defensive roster projections. We're looking ahead and continuing on our 53-man roster predictions before the the Friday night game, and then we'll update them going into the weekend. But first, I want to start off with what we learned about the New Orleans Saints defense in 2022. One of the things that we learned, absolutely beyond anything else, is that this New Orleans Saints defense is ready for the 2022 season. However, its success in terms of winning games, losing games, whatever, is going to hinge entirely upon Tyrann Mathieu and Marcus Maye's ability to be able to learn the scheme, communicate the scheme, and run the system from their positions. It is hard for any NFL team to replace its safeties one at a time. It's even tougher to replace a pair of them in the same offseason. Those guys are critically important to the communication of your team. Safety is generally seen as a non-premium position when you talk to draft nicks and things like that because of how far away they are from the line of scrimmage. They don't affect the ball every play. They don't touch the ball every play, and they don't have the ball thrown at them every play like a cornerback does, particularly a number one corner. However, as Tyrann Mathieu highlighted in his presser on Wednesday, he plays defense, which means that mistakes end up in touchdowns. It ends up in losing games. And we've seen bad safety play in New Orleans before and what it turns into. Remember the Saints spending a ton of money on Jairus Byrd? Sorry to bring it up, but it was the truth. It happened. And the way that ended up working out, where you dealt with not only injury, but you also seemed to deal with guys that didn't really fit the system. And the system, of course, was also changing many times during those years. Now, you look going into 2022, and the thing that you notice is that this New Orleans Saints defense is going to be very multiple, very versatile. And maybe that's the place where Tyrann Mathieu and Marcus Maye have a little bit of maybe the largest learning curve. Because not only do they have to learn the system, the scheme, and how to communicate it, but they have to learn multiple ways to impact and be a part of that very same system and scheme. Some plays you're going to see Marcus Maye as the deep safety. Sometimes he'll be the box safety. Sometimes you see Tyrann Mathieu as a deep safety, sometimes a box safety, sometimes he'll be in the slot, sometimes he'll be blitzing off the edge. Same thing for Marcus Maye. Then you consider all the different ways that C.J. Gardner-Johnson could potentially be used. You consider all the different ways that P.J. Williams might be used. Consider all the ways that Bradley Roby might be used. And then, of course, you have all of the versatility, everything that changes on the defensive line, down in and down out, rotating like a hockey team. There's a lot of opportunity for miscommunication there because of how much changes on a down-by-down basis for the New Orleans Saints. So communication, particularly at the second level, deep, taking away big plays, and then, of course, the communication of Demario Davis, which you feel a lot more secure about because you've seen it work already. Those are going to be the main ingredients to a successful 2022 defensive season for the New Orleans Saints. If all of that comes together, and if health is there, this New Orleans Saints team is a top 5 defensive unit in the NFL as 2022 wraps up. Now, health, of course, is the largest X factor when it comes to all of that. As long as everybody else is executing, though, you should still be able to win games if you're missing a piece here and there. It's when you get into the 2021 situations where you have 20-something of your starters down, then all of a sudden you're in a much deeper pit at that point, or 20-something players down, let me say it that way. But hopefully that won't be the case here in 2022. Now, the other thing that ends up impacting the way that the New Orleans Saints defense either wins or loses in 2022 is going to be defensive interior. I look at these guys like David Onyemata, Albert Huggins, these guys that can play a little bit of nose tackle like Malcolm Roach. Cam Jordan kind of highlighted them as the unheralded kind of, most important players on the defensive line. And one of the reasons why you might hear that is because think about where a nose tackle lines up, nose to nose with the center, right? They line up immediately over the center, sometimes called a zero tech. Getting a push up the middle means that the quarterback can't step up. That means that quarterback stays further away from the line of scrimmage, stays in their drop back, doesn't get the opportunity to move up and evade pressure, which means that those edges that are coming around and they're bending those edges get an opportunity to get in at the quarterback. So that's why that middle pressure becomes so important. Not only is the defensive interior important in the pass rush in that specific scenario, but they're also important in the run game, making sure that you're not, leaving holes wide open in the middle of the offensive line, all of that. So that's the other piece where the New Orleans Saints have spent a lot of time. They've looked at a lot of players there. Guys like Jaleel Johnson, who unfortunately went to injured reserve, was eventually, if I remember correctly, released with injury designation. But then you also have Kentavius Street, a free agent that they brought in. You bring back Albert Huggins, you bring back Shai Tuttle, you bring back Malcolm Roach, who's had a great offseason so far, especially since the first preseason game. And then, of course, you've got David Onyemata, one of the best in the NFL at the position. So for the Saints, all three levels matter, of course, when it comes to the 2022 defensive success that they look to have. But they seem ready. They look very ready to be able to go out there and be a successful unit in 2022. You need communication. You're going to need those safeties to be able to buckle in and be able to run the scheme and communicate the scheme quickly, right, as the season begins. You're going to have to deal with potentially losing Marcus Maye for about 3 games. So PJ Williams stepping in actually kind of helps you a little bit in that sense in terms of communication, because he's the player in the secondary that's maybe most familiar with Dennis Allen's system, because outside of Cam Jordan, he spent the most time in it, right? Then you look at the second level with Demario Davis, what he brings you, you're solid there. And then that defensive line, interior pressure becomes a huge becomes of huge importance. So that's how the New Orleans Saints are going to be successful in 2022. But what we learned about them over the course of camp is that all of those things seem to be firing on all cylinders, and they look ready for 2022. Coming up next, we'll take a look at the defensive side of our 53-man roster projection, getting in a little bit early so that we can kind of set the table before that Los Angeles Chargers game tonight, where we'll update that 53-man roster this weekend. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about my friend Dave. Okay, Dave's not my friend, but Dave helps me out like a good friend would. The Dave app is absolutely what I've been looking for a little bit of help every now and then. So I want to tell you all about it. Dave is a banking app that can help you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. Sometimes you need a little bit of help, whether it be putting some gas in your tank, especially the gas prices right now, whether it be about buying a gift for somebody or maybe an upcoming special event, something like that, or even just catching up on bills. Maybe you need to move, something like that, and you need some help with some of those moving expenses. Dave is here to help. And best of all, you can get help with all of those expenses that have been stressing you out without any of the hangups. No interest, no credit check necessary for this. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app and are now able to get the financial relief that they need with extra cash. So go and check them out. Download the Dave app in the App Store right now. That's DAVE, like somebody's name, right? Sign up for the extra cash account so that you can get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, make sure that you visit dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking is provided by Evolve, member FDIC. Future you will thank you. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again so much for making us your first listen of the day every day. Starting on Wednesday, August 31st, we're going to be bringing you the Ultimate Pro Football Season Preview 2022. Just search Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022 on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can get the division by division breakdowns, answering all of the questions that you have going into the 2022 NFL season. Got that on the way beginning August 31st. You can also find that on Locked On NFL. All right, so continuing on with today's show, I want to jump into our roster projection ahead of this Chargers game. I'm kind of setting the table and kind of creating sort of the first look at this so that we can update it after we see the performances during the Chargers game. We did offense in yesterday's episode, so make sure you go and check that out wherever you're listening to this episode. But now as we get to the defense, we'll start off in the trenches and then move our way back. So in the trenches, we'll start with defensive end, your edge defenders. So we're going to go with 5 there at that position. We've got Cam Jordan, Tanoh Kpassagnon, Carl Granderson, Payton Turner, Marcus Davenport. seems pretty simple there. You have a little bit of inside-outside versatility with a guy like Tano Passanio. You also have that with Cam Jordan and Marcus Davenport as well. I think to an extent you can get that with Carl Granderson, who bulked up a bit. I think he's playing at like 285 right now going into this season. So, you get some of that inside-out versatility with several of these players. We were talking about the New Orleans Saints defense being multiple and how that's something that we know about this defense going into 2022, but we've known it for a while. It's basically since 2017 when Ryan Nielsen showed up, and to an extent before that too. So those are your 5 edge rushers. The guys on the interior, we're keeping 4. We're going with David Onyemata, Shia Tuttle, Kentavius Street, and Malcolm Roach. Now, Ryan Nielsen spoke about how since he showed up in 2017 that there is no depth chart in the locker room. That doesn't mean that there aren't starters, right? You'll see several of the same players usually coming out to take the first snaps of each game, but where you rotate after that, who comes in next, is not an established cadence. It's kind of built on down distance in game situations. So it's not like you go from, defensive line A to defensive line B to defensive line C every single time throughout the first 3 rotations of a defensive line in a game. You'll kind of have defensive line A, and then you'll have a whole different defensive line, a second defensive line that will come in based upon what the next look is. Is it a first and long? Is it a third and short? Is it a, so on and so forth. So whenever that next rotation comes in, it's kind of more based on down distance game situation than it is based upon an order of the depth chart. So important to keep in mind, because sometimes you're going to see Malcolm Roach start, depending upon what the matchup is. Sometimes you're going to see Shai Tuttle start next to David Onyemata, depending upon what the matchup is. So just having these guys with a bunch of different skill sets, I think is really important. And Roach is somebody who also has some inside-outside versatility, just like David Onyemata does as well. Let's get to the second level here. Linebackers, Demario Davis is on this team. I don't even know why I read his name. No, I do know why I read his name, because we got to say he's on the roster. Demario Davis is there. Pete Werner, Caden Ellis. I think those are your 3 starters. I don't know if Werner's going to be healthy to start the season. I think he only attended like 6 out of the 20 practices, or only participated in 6 out of the 20 practices. So he could be dealing with, his continued sort of groin issues for a little while. We'll have to see. But Demario Davis, Pete Werner, Caden Ellis are on the roster. And then I'm going with the guys that have experience after that. Eric Wilson, John Bostic, and Chase Hansen. I know Chase Hansen isn't a proven veteran in the NFL like a guy like Eric Wilson or John Bostic are, but he knows the system and scheme better than really anybody else. I mean, he has spent just as much time as Demario Davis in the system, right? Or almost as much time as Demario Davis in the system. So those are the 6 that I keep. And I think that if Pete Werner is unable to go for you at the beginning of the season, then either Eric Wilson or Chase Hansen rotating depending upon the situation makes a lot of sense. I know Nephi Sewell's been getting those first team reps, but I don't think that he makes the roster. I think it's just an opportunity to get a look at him, but he'll be a prime practice squad player. And we'll also talk about him in a little bit. Safeties I'll go to next, because I have the Saints keeping more safeties than I have them keeping corners, but there's a little bit of a blend there. Tyrann Mathieu, Marcus Maye, PJ Williams, and CJ Gardner-Johnson are all, of course, locks, but PJ Williams and CJ Gardner-Johnson give you some corner versatility as well. CJ is your starting slot corner, even though he's listed at safety, right? Quote unquote. Then I've got them keeping JT Gray and Justin Evans. So I've actually got them keeping 6 safeties, but remember, one of them is technically a corner, so you can say 5 safeties and 5 corners. No, I don't have them keeping Daniel Sorensen, even if Marcus Maye is suspended at the beginning of the season. I think maybe then you load up with maybe another linebacker, or you load up with another cornerback, or maybe even somewhere else, but I just don't see Daniel Sorensen making the roster. And then finally at corner, I've got them keeping 4 corners. But remember, CJ Gardner-Johnson's technically a part of this number as well. But I've got Marshall Lattimore, Paulson Adebo, Bradley Roby, and Quentin Meeks. Quentin Meeks, I think, has played extremely well. Actually, Brian Allen has played well also. But Brian Allen's play has been a little bit more up and down. I mean, you've seen it during the preseason games. He comes up with the interception, but then completely has, something, just completely forgets what's going on and misses assignments and things like that at the end of that Houston Texans game. So it's been a little bit more up and down, a little bit more volatile when it comes to him. But I think with Quentin Meeks, things have been a little bit more consistent. And I think that he has shown a lot over the course of the past couple of weeks in terms of practice with PBUs and, playing really good defense on guys that are much bigger than him and all that. And he's a big guy himself. I mean, he is a quintessential NFC South big time, big size corner. So I think that he makes a lot of sense. So in the trenches, Cam Jordan, Tano Passanio, Carl Granderson, Payton Turner, and Marcus Davenport are your edges. David Onyemata, Malcolm Roach, Shai Tuttle, and the new addition over the course of the offseason, the free agent signing Kentavius Street are on your interior. At your second level, Demario Davis, Pete Werner, Caden Ellis, those are your three starters. Middle linebacker, weak side, strong side, respectively. You keep the two veterans in John Bostic and Eric Wilson, and then Chase Hansen, who has a lot of experience in the system and can play a couple of different positions for you. In the secondary, we'll go with corners to start this time. Marshall Lattimore, Paulson, Debo, Bradley, Roby, obviously Quentin Meeks. Bridging the gap between them and safety is CJ Gardner-Johnson. And then at safety, you've got Tyrann Mathieu, Marcus Maye, PJ Williams, JT Gray, and Justin Evans. So pretty standard in terms of what we're looking at there. Not a lot of surprises, not a lot of opportunities for a job, honestly, outside of maybe linebacker depth and maybe defensive interior depth. Outside of that, not a lot of space open on that New Orleans Saints defense. So another good sign for this defense going into 2022. All right, coming up next, we're going to take a look at 3 players that you need to watch against the Chargers, and I'll give you a little bit of land yap as well. So we got that coming up for you as we continue on to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. First, I want to tell you about our friends over at Bet Online. Listen, I don't bet on preseason games, but if you want to, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can get in on, including odds, lines, even props as well. How many passing yards, how many snaps, how many this, that, and the other. There's a whole bunch over there. You've also got the odds and lines that are up right now, spreads, things like that for the Saints season opener against the Atlanta Falcons, who they are favored to win against on the road. But you've also got several other games that are available as well. Don't feel like betting on the Saints. And of course, you've got the other 31 NFL teams. There's college football on the way sooner than that NFL regular season. Oh, we get college football next weekend. I'm so excited. So there's so much for you to check out over at Bet Online. You can find them on your mobile device or your laptop, desktop, whatever it is that you're using to surf the web. Check them out, Bet Online, where the game starts. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with 3 players to watch in tonight's matchup against the Los Angeles Chargers. We'll start off with a pair of wide receivers over on the offensive side, then we'll finish up over on the defensive side. On the offensive side, I think the 2 players to watch are going to be Kirk Merritt, number 85, as well as potentially wide receiver Rashid Shaheed and return specialist Rashid Shaheed. Listen, the Saints taking Kirk Merritt, who was focused in at wide receiver, and then moving him over to running back, tells me that they're looking to see all the things that he can do. That quote from Dennis Allen keeps ringing in my head. The more that you can do on the field, the more valuable you become. And so now you're seeing that Kirk Merritt can be valuable as a wide receiver. He could be valuable as a returner, had the big 59-yard return against the Packers in the second preseason game. And now you're seeing him get all these reps at running back, not only running routes out of there, but having some good runs as well, some nice explosive ones toward the outside. He has been an absolute cutback machine over the course of his running back reps, to where the play flow will be going to the left, but he sees some daylight to the right and he cuts back and he's got a wide open field. He sees it and he gets to it quickly, very, very quickly. I don't know if that's something maybe he's learning from Alvin Kamara, picking his brain a little bit, but it's been outstanding to see so far. So I think Kirk Merritt is absolutely a player that you keep an eye out on tonight to see if he's able to solidify himself a roster spot, because he might not take a wide receiver spot. They might count him, designate him as a running back, but because they're keeping a running back who has the wide receiver versatility, then you don't have to keep a 6th wide receiver, right? You have one on the roster. Otherwise, you keep him as a wide receiver, a la Ty Montgomery over the course of the past couple of years, and then you have the running back versatility with him to where you can utilize him in the backfield should you choose, or if you're in a pinch, right? Just like we saw with Ty Montgomery years ago. The next player is another wide receiver, but also return specialist, Rashid Shaheed. The Weber State alum, undrafted free agent rookie, has been missing in action when it comes to the preseason games. Now, he was on the NFI list to start camp, so him not playing in the first preseason game wasn't really a surprise. I thought maybe we would see him against the Packers. He was fielding a lot of punts and a lot of kick returns during the Packers and Saints joint practices. So I thought, oh, okay, maybe they're getting him ready, right? Like maybe we're seeing him, bring all these in, and maybe that translates to him getting an opportunity against the Packers. And instead we saw guys like Marquez Callaway. We of course saw Kirk Merritt, and we saw Tony Jones Jr. returning kicks over the course of that game. So I'm just interested at this point. Like I'm kind of just curious and excited. Like, are we ever going to see it? Like, it's just this elusive thing that I'm really curious about. He's a very talented returner. There's absolutely no doubt about that. The issue is, where do you have room for him on the roster? And you might not. So the interesting thing is going to be, does he get an opportunity to go out there and return kicks, or are the Saints going to kind of hide him and say, no, we want to get you to the practice squad? which would make a lot of sense because Deontay Hardy has dealt with injuries in his past. And so if something like that were to happen, then you elevate Rashid Shaheed, then you have the opportunity there for your returner, right? Who can also stretch the field for you. Actually, that's one thing that we've never talked about. And I need to do a better job at that. Rashid Shaheed has not only been somebody that has impressed in terms of returning, impressed, right? You can only show so much in practice, as we've talked about. Non-contact return drills are barely drills. But beyond doing just that, we've also seen him beat safeties. We've seen him get over the top of safeties. We've seen him beat corners with his speed. He hasn't been able to connect on any of those deep balls. He's oftentimes receiving passes from guys like Andy Dalton and Ian Book, who don't have the downfield accuracy that a Jameis Winston has. But get him on the field with Jameis Winston and see what happens. So that's another place to where maybe, Deontay Hardy, if he deals with any kind of injury or anything like that over the course of the 2022 season, you have another guy that you can plug in and be one of those speed guys, as Dennis Allen highlighted both Deontay Hardy and Chris Olave as that category of receiver. You end up having him come in and serve that role. Now, the hard thing is going to be, where is Kirk Merritt in that conversation too? Because if Kirk Merritt ends up on the practice squad and doesn't make the active roster, then Kirk Merritt gives you that as well. So he ends up stepping ahead of Rashid Shaheed in that rotation, but huge opportunity, hopefully, for both of them. We'll see if we get to see Rashid Shaheed tonight. Over on the defensive side, I'm going to go back to Nephi Sewell, the undrafted free agent rookie linebacker out of Utah. Him and he's just got NFL bloodline, this guy, pedigree after pedigree after pedigree. His brother, of course, Penei Sewell, who's the starting left tackle now for the Detroit Lions. You've gotten a closer look at him and Dan Campbell and Aaron Glenn and Mark Brunell and all of these other Saints connections that you've seen over on Hard Knocks over the course of the season. But I think that, the thing to watch with Nephi Sewell is, can he make plays in game action? He's moved up into first team snaps over the course of the past week, but does that mean that the Saints are looking at him as a viable roster, a spot? We don't know. Sometimes you just put those guys in those situations and see how they handle it. Doesn't necessarily translate into, a roster spot, but he has turned those opportunities in success. He hasn't looked bad. He was in great coverage on a wheel route to Alvin Kamara the other day. The only problem is that the throw was perfect from Jameis Winston, and Alvin Kamara is Alvin Kamara. But he was in fantastic position in that. So knowing that he can carry a running back up the field on the outside is a really impressive feat for any linebacker, but also knowing that he's making plays in the run game and that he's been doing great in the middle. So there's pieces there when it comes to Nephi Sewell, but you just need to see all of it come together in game action, in full speed, and see how it all goes down. Today's lanyap is simple. You're hoping for health. That's the most important thing coming out of this game. However many starters get opportunities in the first series, however many of these younger guys that are fighting for their careers, that are fighting for opportunities in the NFL into the fourth quarter, from first snap to final snap, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for health. So continue to wish good on that. If players come out clean, that's the most important thing that can come from this preseason game. Coming up tomorrow, actually, we'll get you a recap of that, kind of a recap of the preseason action. We'll talk about the guys that stood out, who helped themselves. That's really the main storyline there. And then we'll update our 53-man roster projection based upon the action that we saw against the Chargers, if there are any changes. If not, we'll just recap it. We'll review it, because then the roster cuts very likely are going to start happening Saturday and Sunday, as teams have to get to that 53-man roster limit by Tuesday afternoon. So I would expect to see cuts starting to happen sooner rather than later. So either way, we will at least recap it and review it so you're ready for those roster cuts. New Orleans Saints have also been apparently getting trade calls, according to Nick Underhill of New Orleans .football, with a lot of players. So we'll keep an eye out on that. Guys like Bradley Roby, Nick Vanette, and Zach Bonner, guys that we've talked about before as potential trade options. But guys like Marquez Callaway, Traquan Smith, Deontay Hardy even, all fall into that category as well. So something to keep an eye out on. Instead of just cutting a player, can you get something in return? So we'll continue to take a look at that and kind of discuss some of those players again in terms of who they could be getting calls for and what you could get for them. I appreciate you, as always, for coming through for another episode of Locked On Saints and making us your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you go and check out that Locked On Fantasy Football podcast, as well as Locked On Dynasty Football. Get ready for your fantasy football draft so that you can dominate your fantasy football leagues this season. As always, I appreciate you so much for making us a part of your day and a part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. Yes, I will be at the game tonight, so make sure that you come through. Big shout out to Ryan and Reggie for their help, as well as my guys Ian and DeMarco for theirs in my recent move. You can see it's been a blank background all day, but that will all get fixed up here soon. Appreciate you as always, y'all. Thank you very much. And for everything you need around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.